3 minutes. That's how long Derek Hartman was inside the gas station. 3 minutes to buy coffee on a December morning in rural Nebraska. When he came back out, his passenger seat was reclined. The car was locked. He'd checked it twice. The security cameras would later show no one approached the vehicle. No one touched it. No one was near it. But the seat was flat, and there was condensation on the inside of the passenger window, as if someone had been breathing. Derek didn't know it yet, but he was the third owner of that 2009 Honda Accord. The first owner, Jennifer Hastings, returned it after 8 months, claiming it gave her bad feelings. 1 month later, she was dead. The second owner sold it within 18 months, too terrified to explain why. Now Derek owned it, and something inside was getting stronger. Over the next 67 days, Derek would document 12 separate incidents, each one impossible, each one caught on camera showing nothing, and each one bringing him closer to a truth that researchers call threshold phenomena, entities that use everyday objects as doorways between their world and ours. The question isn't whether something was in Derek's car. The thermal cameras prove that. The question is, where did it come from? What did it want? And what happened to the people who tried to ignore it? Before we dive into the evidence that will make you rethink every time you've been alone in your car, make sure you're subscribed. This case involves documented proof, recorded evidence, and a pattern that's still happening today. Let's begin. Derek Hartman wasn't the type of person who believed in the unexplainable. At 23 years old, he worked as an assistant manager at a sporting goods store in Lincoln, Nebraska, and prided himself on being logical, methodical, and skeptical of anything that couldn't be proven. He'd grown up in a household where his father, a retired engineer, had taught him that every mystery had a rational solution. You just had to look hard enough. On the morning of December 8th, 2012, Derek left his apartment at 6:30 a.m. for a weekend trip to visit his girlfriend in Omaha. The drive was familiar, roughly 50 miles of flat highway he'd traveled dozens of times. His car, a silver 2009 Honda Accord, was his most prized possession. He'd bought it used, but kept it immaculate. No food wrappers, no clutter. Seats adjusted precisely to his preference. The passenger seat was always upright because Derek hated the aesthetic of a reclined seat when the car was empty. It felt sloppy, neglected. The weather that morning was unremarkable for Nebraska in December. Overcast skies, temperatures hovering just below freezing, patches of snow clinging to the edges of the highway. Derek had his coffee in the cup holder, a playlist of early 2000s rock humming through the speakers, and his mind occupied with plans for the weekend. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt unusual. He was simply a young man driving to see someone he cared about. Around 8 a.m., Derek pulled off Interstate 80 near a small town called Pleasant Dale, population barely 300. He needed gas and wanted to stretch his legs. The station was one of those aging rural stops that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1990s. Single-story building, 4 pumps, flickering neon sign advertising diesel and lottery tickets. A semi-truck sat near the far pump, engine running, but Derek saw no driver. The parking lot was otherwise deserted. He pulled into a spot near the building rather than at the pumps because he wanted to go inside first, grab another coffee, maybe a snack for the road. He turned off the engine, pocketed his keys, and, this is the detail he'd repeat hundreds of times later, he specifically looked at both front seats before getting out. Driver's seat, upright. Passenger seat, upright. He remembered thinking the car looked clean, organized, exactly how he liked it. He locked the doors using the key fob, heard the familiar beep, saw the lights flash. Then he walked inside. The interior of the gas station was fluorescent bright and smelled like old coffee and cleaning solution. A single attendant, a woman in her 50s, stood behind the counter, scrolling through her phone. Derek nodded at her, grabbed a coffee from the self-serve station, and picked up a package of beef jerky. The whole transaction took maybe 3 minutes. He made small talk about the weather. The woman barely responded. He paid in cash, pocketed his change, and walked back outside. That's when he saw it. Through the driver's side window, clear as daylight, the passenger seat was fully reclined. Not partially. Not tilted back a few degrees. Completely flat, as if someone had pressed the lever all the way down and pushed the seat into a horizontal position. Derek stopped walking. He stood there, coffee in hand, staring at his car. His first thought was that he'd made a mistake, that maybe he hadn't noticed it before. But he knew that wasn't true. He'd looked directly at that seat. He'd seen it upright. He approached the car slowly, scanning the parking lot. The semi-truck was still there, still idling, but there was no movement around it. No other vehicles had pulled in. The gas station door hadn't opened after he'd left. No one could have accessed his car. And yet the evidence was undeniable. The seat was reclined. Derek unlocked the door and leaned inside. The car smelled normal, like the air freshener he kept clipped to the vent. No strange odors, no sign of disturbance. He checked the back seat, looked under the front seats, examined the doors for any signs of forced entry. Nothing. Everything was locked and secure, except for the seat. And then he noticed the condensation, a faint, fog-like residue on the inside of the passenger window, right where someone's breath would leave a mark if they'd been leaning close to the glass. It was subtle, already beginning to fade in the cold air, but it was there. Derek's hands started to shake. He backed out of the car and looked around again, this time more desperately. The parking lot remained empty. The attendant inside was still on her phone. The semi-truck driver, wherever they were, hadn't appeared. Derek stood there, alone, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He didn't call the police. He didn't go back inside to ask questions. He simply got in his car, adjusted the seat back to its upright position, and sat there for 5 full minutes, breathing hard, trying to convince himself there was a logical explanation. There wasn't, and this was only the beginning. Derek didn't tell his girlfriend about the incident right away. When he arrived in Omaha that afternoon, he was quieter than usual, distracted, but he chalked it up to the long drive and brushed off her concern. He spent the weekend trying to forget what had happened, rationalizing it as some kind of fluke. Maybe the seat mechanism had malfunctioned. Maybe the cold weather had caused something to shift. But every time he got into his car over the next few days, he found himself checking the passenger seat obsessively, making sure it stayed upright, locked in place. 3 days later, on December 11th, Derek was driving home from work around 10 p.m. He'd stayed late to finish inventory, and the roads were nearly empty. He stopped at a different gas station, this time on the outskirts of Lincoln, to grab a soda. It was a newer place, well lit, with security cameras visible on every corner of the building. Derek parked under one of the lights, locked his doors, and went inside. The stop took less than 2 minutes. When he came back out, the passenger seat was reclined again. This time, Derek's rationalization crumbled. He stood in the parking lot, hands trembling, staring at his car under the harsh, fluorescent glow. He marched back inside and asked the clerk if he could review the security footage. The clerk, a teenager who looked barely old enough to be working the night shift, seemed confused but agreed. They pulled up the feed from the camera covering Derek's parking spot. For 2 minutes and 14 seconds, the car sat untouched. No one approached it, no doors open, no movement at all. And yet, when Derek returned to his vehicle on the footage, the seat was visibly reclined. The clerk shrugged and said sometimes cameras miss things, or maybe Derek had left it that way. Derek knew he hadn't. He'd checked the seat before leaving the car. He checked it every single time now. He drove home that night, barely able to focus on the road, his mind racing through possibilities. Was someone following him? Was there a hidden way into his car that he didn't know about? Could someone have cloned his key fob? None of it made sense, but the alternative, that something impossible was happening, made even less sense. Over the next week, Derek became consumed with the mystery. He took his car to a Honda dealership and asked them to inspect the locking mechanism, The seat controls, everything. The mechanics found nothing wrong. The locks functioned perfectly. The seats had no defects. One mechanic joked that maybe Derek had a ghost, and the comment, meant to be lighthearted, sent a chill down Derek's spine. He started researching online, looking for similar experiences. What he found was both reassuring and terrifying. There were others, not many, but enough. Forum posts dating back years scattered across automotive boards and paranormal websites describing the exact same phenomenon. People would leave their cars locked, return minutes later, and find the passenger seat reclined. Some reported condensation on the windows. Others found the seat warm, as if someone had been sitting there. A few claimed to have seen shadowy figures in their rearview mirrors, there 1 second, gone the next. Derek read every account he could find, his heart pounding. None of them had explanations. None of them had been solved. One post in particular stood out. A woman in Colorado had experienced the reclined seat phenomenon repeatedly over the course of 2 months in 2009. She'd taken her car to multiple mechanics, installed additional locks, even set up her own camera system inside the vehicle. Nothing worked. The seat kept reclining. Eventually, she'd sold the car, and the incident stopped. But in her final post, she mentioned something that Derek found chilling. She'd started to feel like she wasn't alone in the car even when she was driving, like someone was in the passenger seat, invisible, watching her. She described a weight, a presence, something she couldn't see but could feel. Derek didn't want to believe it. He was a rational person, but every time he got into his car now, he felt it too. A subtle unease, a prickling on the back of his neck, like someone was sitting beside him, breathing quietly, waiting. He started avoiding his car when he could, taking buses or getting rides from friends, but the phenomenon followed him. On December 18th, exactly 10 days after the first incident, Derek returned to his car after a short grocery run to find not only the passenger seat reclined, but both front seats pushed all the way back as if someone had been lying across them. The doors were still locked. The alarm hadn't been triggered, and on the dashboard, barely visible in the dim light, was a single handprint in the thin layer of dust Derek had been meaning to clean. It wasn't his handprint. The fingers were too long, the palm too narrow. Derek stood in the parking lot, groceries forgotten, staring at that handprint, and for the first time since this began, he felt genuine fear. Not confusion, not frustration, fear. Because whatever was happening, it was escalating, and it wanted him to know it was there. Derek finally told his girlfriend, Emily, everything on December 20th. They were sitting in her apartment, and he'd been unusually quiet all evening. When he described the incidents, the reclined seats, the condensation, the handprint, she listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief to something close to fear. She asked the obvious questions. Had he called the police? Had he considered someone was stalking him? Could it be a prank from a coworker? Derek had considered all of it. He'd even filed a police report after the handprint incident, but the officer who took his statement had been skeptical, suggesting vandalism or a faulty seat mechanism. Emily convinced Derek to take the car to a locksmith who specialized in automotive security. The locksmith, a man named Gerald who'd been in the business for 30 years, examined the Honda with meticulous attention. He tested every lock, inspected the key fob signal, checked for signs of tampering. After 2 hours, Gerald sat Derek down and said something Derek would never forget. "Your car is secure. Whoever's getting inside, if someone is getting inside, they're not doing it through conventional means." Derek asked what he meant by conventional means. Gerald didn't answer directly, but he mentioned that in his career he'd seen 3 other cases like this. Cars that seemed to be accessed by something that didn't follow the normal rules of locks and keys. Derek pressed for details, but Gerald was reluctant. Eventually he admitted that all 3 cases had involved people who felt a presence in their vehicles, and in each case, The phenomenon stopped only when the person sold or abandoned the car. One man had simply left his car parked on the side of a highway and walked away from it. Another had it towed to a junkyard and never looked back. Gerald suggested, half seriously, that Derek might want to consider doing the same. Derek left the shop more unsettled than when he'd arrived. He couldn't just abandon his car. It was paid off, reliable, and he couldn't afford a replacement. Instead, he decided to document everything. He installed a dashboard camera that recorded continuously when the car was parked, powered by a battery pack. He started keeping a detailed journal of every incident, dates, times, locations, what he found when he returned to the car. He began varying his routine, parking in different spots, locking the car in different ways, even leaving notes on the dashboard asking whoever or whatever was doing this to stop. The notes were never touched. The camera footage showed nothing unusual, and yet the incidents continued. On Christmas Eve, Derek visited his parents in Grand Island, Nebraska, a 2-hour drive from Lincoln. He parked in their driveway, locked the car, and didn't return to it until the next morning. When he opened the driver's side door on Christmas Day, he found the passenger seat reclined, the glove compartment open, and his car manual lying on the floor. Nothing was missing, nothing was damaged, but something had been inside. His father suggested rodents or a malfunction. His mother, more religious than the rest of the family, quietly suggested he have the car blessed. Derek didn't know what to think anymore. Back in Lincoln, Derek reached out to a paranormal investigator he'd found through one of the online forums. The investigator, a woman named Dr. Sarah Connolly, who held a PhD in psychology and had spent years studying unexplained phenomena, agreed to meet him. Over coffee, Derek described everything in exhaustive detail. Dr. Connolly listened carefully, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she asked if Derek had experienced any other unusual occurrences in his life recently. Missing time, strange dreams, feelings of being watched outside of the car. Derek said no, though he admitted the feeling of being watched had started to follow him everywhere. Dr. Connolly explained that cases like Derek's fell into a category she called threshold phenomena, events that seemed to occur at the boundary between explicable and inexplicable, often involving objects or spaces that people interact with daily. Cars, she said, were particularly common sites for such phenomena because they represented both security and vulnerability, private space in public settings. She'd documented dozens of cases involving cars over the years, phantom passengers, unexplained movements, objects appearing or disappearing. Most remained unsolved. She offered to set up a more sophisticated monitoring system in Derek's car, including EMF detectors and thermal cameras. Derek agreed immediately. For 3 days, Dr. Connolly's equipment ran continuously, recording everything. On the third day, December 30th, Derek returned to his car after a short walk to find the passenger seat reclined once again, but this time, the thermal camera had captured something. At exactly 3:47 p.m., a cold spot appeared in the passenger seat area, a localized drop in temperature of nearly 15 degrees that lasted for 43 seconds. During that time, the pressure sensors embedded in the seat registered weight, approximately 130 pounds, pressing down as if someone had sat down heavily. Then suddenly, both the temperature and the weight returned to normal. The seat reclined during those 43 seconds. Dr. Connolly reviewed the footage multiple times, her face growing increasingly pale. She told Derek she'd seen similar patterns before, but never this clear, never this measurable. Something was interacting with his car, something that had mass, that displaced air, that could manipulate physical objects, but it wasn't showing up on visual cameras. It wasn't leaving biological traces. It existed in a space between what could be seen and what could be measured, and that terrified her more than if it had been simply unexplainable. Derek asked what he should do. Dr. Connolly's answer was simple and devastating. Get rid of the car. Whatever this is, it's attached to the vehicle, it's not following you, it's inhabiting the space, and it's getting stronger. Derek didn't want to believe Dr. Connolly's assessment, but he couldn't ignore the evidence. By early January 2013, the incidents were occurring almost daily. The passenger seat would be reclined when he returned from work, from the gym, from quick stops at convenience stores. The patterns were becoming more complex. Sometimes he'd find both front seats adjusted, or the rearview mirror tilted at an impossible angle, or the radio preset to a station he'd never programmed. Each time, the car remained locked, the alarm untritched, the footage showing nothing. On January 9th, something changed. Derek was driving home from dinner with Emily when he glanced at the passenger seat and saw, for just a fraction of a second, the outline of a person. Not a solid figure, more like a distortion in the air. A shimmer that suggested a human shape sitting beside him. He swerved, nearly hitting the curb, his heart hammering. When he looked again, the seat was empty. But he'd seen it. He was certain he'd seen something. That night, Derek couldn't sleep. He lay in bed researching every possible explanation. Hallucinations brought on by stress, carbon monoxide leaks in the car, psychological conditions that could cause shared delusions. But none of it fit. Dr. Connolly's equipment had measured actual physical changes. Other people had experienced the same phenomenon in different cars, in different states, with no connection to each other except this one bizarre commonality. There had to be a pattern, a reason, something that linked all these cases together. Derek went back through the forum posts, reading them more carefully this time, taking notes. He found 23 documented cases over 15 years that matched his experience exactly. Locked cars, reclined seats, unexplained presences. He started mapping them geographically and noticed something interesting. Most of the incidents occurred in the Midwest: Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri. A few were in Colorado and Wyoming. There was a concentration, a cluster pattern that suggested something regional. He dug deeper and discovered something even more compelling. 8 of the 23 people who'd reported the phenomenon had been driving Honda Accords manufactured between 2008 and 2011. That couldn't be coincidence. Derek contacted several of these people directly, reaching out through old forum accounts and social media. 3 responded. Each confirmed they'd eventually sold or abandoned their vehicles, and each said the incidents had stopped immediately afterward. One man, a teacher from Iowa, mentioned something Derek found particularly unsettling. He'd researched the history of his car before selling it, and discovered it had been previously owned by someone who died in an unrelated accident 6 months after selling the vehicle. Derek pulled the vehicle history report for his Honda Accord. The car had 2 previous owners. The first had kept it for less than a year before trading it in. The second, a man named Robert Callahan from Kearney, Nebraska, had owned it for 18 months before selling it to the dealership where Derek had bought it. Derek managed to track down Robert Callahan's contact information and called him on January 15th. The conversation lasted 20 minutes and left Derek shaken. Robert remembered the car well. He'd loved it at first. Reliable, good gas mileage, comfortable. But after about 3 months, strange things started happening. The passenger seat would be in different positions. He'd feel like someone was watching him while he drove. Objects would move around inside the car. His sunglasses would be in the back seat when he'd left them in the cup holder. The air vents would be adjusted. Small things. He'd taken it to mechanics multiple times. No one found anything wrong. Eventually, he couldn't stand it anymore and sold it, taking a financial loss just to be rid of it. Derek asked if Robert knew anything about the first owner. Robert said he'd never met them, but the dealership had mentioned something odd when he bought the car. The previous owner had returned it after only 8 months, claiming it gave them bad feelings. The dealership had laughed it off as buyer's remorse, but now both Robert and Derek wondered if that first owner had experienced the same phenomenon. Derek called the dealership. They still had records, but they wouldn't release the previous owner's information due to privacy policies. Derek hit a wall. Then, on January 23rd, Derek experienced the most intense incident yet. He was sitting in his car in a parking garage, engine off, waiting for Emily to finish her shift at the hospital where she worked. It was late evening, nearly 10 p.m., and the garage was mostly empty. Derek was scrolling through his phone when he felt the temperature in the car drop suddenly. His breath became visible in the air. The passenger seat began to recline slowly, mechanically, as if an invisible hand was pressing the lever. Derek froze, watching in horror as the seat moved completely flat. Then the door lock clicked. Not all the doors, just the passenger door. It unlocked and the handle moved, as if someone was trying to open it from the outside. Derek scrambled out of the driver's side, stumbling backward, his phone clattering to the ground. He stood there, watching his car from 10 feet away, his whole body shaking. The passenger door swung open slowly, completely open, then paused. For several seconds, nothing happened. The interior light was on, illuminating the empty passenger seat, the reclined position, the open glove compartment. Then, just as slowly, the door closed itself. The lock clicked. The seat remained reclined. Derek didn't get back in the car that night. He called Emily, told her to meet him outside, and they took her car home. The next morning, Derek called Dr. Connolly and told her he was ready to follow her advice. He was going to get rid of the car, but before he could list it for sale, he needed to know one more thing. What happened to the first owner, the person who'd owned it for only 8 months and returned it claiming bad feelings? Dr. Connolly said she had contacts at the DMV and might be able to help. 2 days later, she called Derek back with information that made everything suddenly, horribly, make sense. The first owner of Derek's Honda Accord had been a 27-year-old woman named Jennifer Hastings. She'd purchased the car new in June 2009 and returned it to the dealership in February 2010. According to Dr. Connolly's contacts, Jennifer had filed multiple police reports during those 8 months, claiming someone was breaking into her car, moving things, watching her. The police found no evidence of break-ins. In March 2010, 1 month after returning the car, Jennifer Hastings was found dead in her apartment, an apparent suicide, though the investigation had some unresolved questions. She'd left a note that simply said, "It won't leave me alone." Derek sat in stunned silence after Dr. Connolly shared Jennifer Hastings' story. The timeline was impossible to ignore. Jennifer experiences strange phenomena in the car, returns it claiming it gives her bad feelings, and dies a month later. The car passes to Robert Callahan, who experiences similar incidents and sells it quickly. Then Derek buys it, and the pattern continues, but stronger, more frequent, more aggressive. Something was attached to this vehicle, and it seemed to be growing more powerful with each owner. Dr. Connolly suggested they try to contact Jennifer's family to learn more about her final months. It took Derek several days of research and uncomfortable phone calls, but he eventually reached Jennifer's younger sister, Monica. Monica was hesitant at first, clearly still grieving. But when Derek mentioned the car and the strange incidents, her tone changed completely. She asked him to meet her in person. On February the 2nd, Derek drove to Omaha in Emily's car, not his own, and sat down with Monica at a coffee shop. Monica told Derek that Jennifer had been a healthy, happy person before she bought that Honda Accord. She'd just started a new job, was excited about her independence, treated the car purchase like a major life achievement. But within weeks, Jennifer became anxious, paranoid, convinced someone was stalking her. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain someone had been in her apartment. She started sleeping with the lights on. She'd call Monica at odd hours, terrified, saying she felt watched, followed, haunted. The family thought it was stress from her new job, maybe the beginning of a mental health crisis. Monica described visiting Jennifer in January 2010, about a month before she returned the car. Jennifer had been almost manic, showing Monica printouts of forum posts from people describing similar experiences with their vehicles. She'd become obsessed with the idea that something supernatural was attached to her car, that it was following her home, invading her life. The family staged an intervention, convincing Jennifer to see a therapist. The therapist diagnosed anxiety and started her on medication. Jennifer returned the car shortly after, hoping that removing it from her life would help. It didn't. According to Monica, Jennifer's mental state deteriorated rapidly in the weeks after selling the car. She became withdrawn, stopped going to work, barely left her apartment. She told Monica that getting rid of the car hadn't helped. She could still feel the presence, still sensed something watching her, even though the car was gone. The night before she died, Jennifer called Monica and said something that Monica had never forgotten. "It's not about the car. The car was just the door. It's inside now. It won't stop." Derek felt sick listening to this. He asked Monica if the police had investigated Jennifer's death thoroughly. Monica said they had. There was no sign of foul play, no evidence of anyone else being in the apartment. The official ruling was suicide by overdose, though Monica had always believed there was more to it. Jennifer's therapist had noted that she'd been improving on medication, that suicide seemed inconsistent with her recent progress. But without evidence to the contrary, the case was closed. Derek shared his own experiences with Monica, describing everything that had happened over the past 2 months. Monica listened, tears streaming down her face, and when he finished, she said something that chilled him. "You have to destroy it, not sell it. Destroy it. Don't let it pass to someone else." Derek asked what she meant. Monica explained that after Jennifer's death, she'd done her own research into haunted objects and cursed possessions. She'd come to believe that certain objects could serve as anchors for malevolent entities, and that passing them to new owners only gave the entity more victims, more energy. The car needed to be taken off the road permanently. Derek returned to Lincoln that evening with a decision made. He would not sell the car. He would not trade it in. He would have it destroyed. But first he wanted to understand what he was dealing with. Dr. Connolly agreed to conduct one final experiment. On February 5th, they parked Derek's Honda in an isolated lot outside the city. Dr. Connolly set up her most sophisticated equipment: thermal cameras, EMF detectors, motion sensors, audio recorders, and even a modified Geiger counter to detect any unusual radiation. They left the car locked and monitored it remotely from Dr. Connolly's van, parked 50 yards away. For 3 hours, nothing happened. Then, at 9:47 p.m., every sensor activated simultaneously. The temperature inside the car dropped to 42 degrees. EMF readings spiked to levels Dr. Connolly said she'd only seen once before near high-voltage power lines. The motion sensors detected movement throughout the entire vehicle: passenger seat, driver's seat, back seat, all moving independently. The audio recorder picked up sounds: breathing, shuffling, and then, clear as day, a voice. It was faint, distorted, but unmistakably human. It said 3 words: "Let me in." Dr. Connolly played the recording back multiple times. Derek listened, his hands clenched, his whole body tense. The voice didn't sound male or female. It was somewhere in between, hollow, desperate. "Let me in." Dr. Connolly suggested that whatever entity was attached to the car wasn't trying to possess the vehicle. It was trying to use the vehicle as a gateway to reach the owner. The car was a threshold, a liminal space between the physical world and wherever this thing existed. Every time someone owned the car, they opened that threshold a little wider. Derek asked what would happen if he kept the car, if he didn't destroy it. Dr. Connolly's answer was blunt. "What happened to Jennifer Hastings will happen to you. This entity is patient. It's persistent. It will follow you from the car into your life, into your home, into your mind, and eventually, it will consume you." Derek had no more questions. The next day, he contacted a salvage yard and arranged for the car to be crushed. On February 12th, 2013, Derek watched as his Honda Accord was lifted onto the crusher platform. The salvage yard operator had been puzzled by Derek's insistence that the car be destroyed rather than parted out for scrap. but Derek paid extra to ensure it would be completely demolished. As the crusher descended, Derek felt an overwhelming sense of relief mixed with sadness. Sadness for Jennifer, for Robert, for anyone who'd ever sat in that car and felt what he'd felt. The metal groaned and buckled, glass shattered, and within minutes, the vehicle was reduced to a compacted cube of twisted steel and plastic. But as Derek walked away from the salvage yard that afternoon, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not entirely. Because he'd learned something in his weeks of research, something Dr. Connolly had mentioned almost in passing. Entities attached to objects don't always disappear when the object is destroyed. Sometimes they're released, sometimes they're set free. Derek's life gradually returned to normal after the car was destroyed, though normal would never mean quite what it had before. He bought a used Toyota from a different dealership, this one with a full ownership history he verified personally. He moved to a new apartment, changed some routines, tried to distance himself from everything that had happened. For weeks, he waited for some sign that the presence had followed him, but nothing came. The feeling of being watched faded. The anxiety lifted. By March, Derek began to believe it was actually over. Dr. Connolly checked in with him regularly, conducting what she called follow-up assessments. She asked about his sleep patterns, his emotional state, whether he'd experienced any unusual occurrences. Derek's answers were consistently negative. The phenomenon seemed to have ended with the destruction of the vehicle. Dr. Connolly was cautiously optimistic, but warned Derek to remain vigilant. Some cases, she said, had delayed manifestations, entities that went dormant for months before resurfacing. Derek didn't want to believe it, but he stayed alert. Emily, his girlfriend, had been supportive throughout the ordeal, though Derek could tell it had taken a toll on their relationship. She'd witnessed his fear, his obsession, his gradual descent into paranoia during those 2 months. She'd stood by him, but the experience had changed how she saw the world. They'd had long conversations about what they'd encountered, what it meant, whether they could ever feel truly safe again. In April 2013, they decided to move in together, partly for practical reasons, but also because neither of them wanted to be alone anymore. Derek tried to contact the other people who'd reported similar experiences, wanting to share what he'd learned about destroying the object rather than passing it on. Some responded positively, grateful for the advice. Others had already abandoned their vehicles and moved on with their lives. One person, a woman from Missouri, told Derek something that haunted him. She'd sold her car to a dealership 3 years earlier, and she still sometimes felt the presence, especially at night, as if destroying the physical object wasn't enough to sever the connection. Derek didn't share this with Emily. He didn't want to consider the possibility that he might never be completely free. In June, Dr. Connolly published a paper on threshold phenomena in vehicles, citing Derek's case, anonymously, as one of the most well-documented examples she'd encountered. The paper circulated within paranormal research communities, and Derek received occasional emails from people experiencing similar incidents. He tried to help when he could, always emphasizing the importance of destroying the object rather than passing it to someone else. But he also acknowledged the limits of his understanding. He didn't know what these entities were, where they came from, or why they chose certain vehicles as their anchors. One evening in August, Derek was driving home from work in his Toyota when he glanced at the passenger seat and felt a momentary chill. The seat was upright. The car was quiet. Nothing was wrong. But for just a second, he'd felt it. That old, familiar sense of not being alone. He pulled over, his heart racing, and checked every inch of the car. Nothing. He sat there for 10 minutes, waiting for the feeling to return. It didn't. Derek told himself it was just anxiety, a lingering psychological effect from months of trauma. He started the car and continued home. He never mentioned it to Emily. By the end of 2013, Derek had largely put the experience behind him. He stayed in touch with Dr. Connolly, who continued to study similar cases, and he occasionally checked the forums where he'd first found information about the phenomenon. New posts appeared sometimes, people describing reclined seats, unexplained presences, feelings of being watched. Derek would read them, feel a pang of sympathy, and usually move on. He'd done what he could. He'd shared his story. He couldn't save everyone. But there was one final detail that Derek never shared publicly, something he kept to himself and thought about late at night when he couldn't sleep. 2 weeks after his car was destroyed, he'd received a message on one of the forums from someone claiming to have information about the Honda Accord he'd owned. The message was brief and cryptic. "Your car wasn't the first. It won't be the last. They choose the lonely ones, the ones who spend time alone in enclosed spaces. Stay vigilant. It remembers you." Derek never responded to that message. He deleted it, told himself it was a prank, someone who'd read his forum posts and wanted to frighten him. But he'd saved the username Threshold Watcher 91, and sometimes, late at night, he'd search for other posts from that account. There were dozens scattered across multiple sites, always offering cryptic warnings about haunted vehicles, entities that used cars as doorways, patterns that suggested intelligence and intent. Derek didn't know if the person behind the account was credible or delusional. He didn't know if their warnings were genuine or just elaborate fiction. But he remembered the voice on Dr. Connolly's recording, "Let me in," and he remembered Jennifer Hastings's final message, "It's inside now. It won't stop." 7 years have passed since Derek Hartman destroyed his Honda Accord in that salvage yard. He's married to Emily now, has a stable job, lives a quiet life. He drives a different car and parks in well-lit areas, and sometimes, purely out of habit, still checks to make sure both front seats are upright before walking away. He doesn't talk about what happened anymore. Most people wouldn't believe him, and those who would are people he'd rather not associate with. Dr. Connolly retired from active research in 2018, though she still consults on unusual cases. But the story doesn't end with Derek, because in 2014, a 25-year-old man in Kansas bought a used Accord from a salvage auction, a car that had been rebuilt after being totaled. 3 months later, he posted on a forum about strange incidents, a passenger seat that kept reclining, a feeling of being watched, condensation on windows. The pattern continues, the threshold remains open, and somewhere, in parking lots, and driveways, and dark garages across the Midwest, cars sit locked and seemingly empty, waiting for their owners to return. Waiting for the moment when someone looks through the window and realizes the seat has moved. They're alone. And maybe, just maybe, they've never been alone at all. If you've experienced anything like what Derek went through, be careful who you tell, but more importantly, be careful what you do with that vehicle. Some things, once invited in, never truly leave, and some doors, once opened, can never be completely closed.